Welcome, everyone, to another exciting episode of the None of Our Businesses YouTube show and podcast. With me, Jack DiMatteo and Charlie Zygmunt.
Thanks for joining.
I'm Ty Carr, and we like to talk about things in the news from an accountant's perspective, things in the business news, tax news, financial news, or just news, all from the perspective of not one, but three accountants today. And what do we have on deck? Well, child labor in sourcing chocolate for large multinationals. The U.S. courts cannot intercede, but man, now it makes me think twice about chocolate. 4 million quitting their jobs with confidence there are other opportunities out there. And transitory inflation, is that really a thing? Finally, Bitcoin miners from China moving to Texas? All right, well, we've got some good discussion about these things, so let's get into it. We'll kick it off with Jack.
All right, well, today we've got an interesting Supreme Court decision to start us off. This one comes from Fortune magazine and talks about Supreme Court case where basically our Supreme Court can't step outside our boundaries and enforce child labor laws. So U.S.-based companies that have subsidiaries in some of these foreign countries where I think the article they were talking about, very young children working, 18 ridiculous amounts of hours and days, and they were trying to run it through our Supreme Court to make them stop because as a U.S.-based company, they should have influence over these subsidiaries to make them stop and enforce child labor laws to our standards. And the Supreme Court basically said, no, that's not up to them to do that. Those subsidiaries can run as they do in their home country, and the fact that they're based here in the U.S. that doesn't give them influence over those countries to enforce U.S. laws regarding child labor. My thought on this was to the world we live in today, everybody's protesting something, so I'm boycotting something. So I'm wondering why we don't have protesters outside the headquarters of Nestle USA in Cargill, protesting the fact that they're turning a blind eye to the fact that these child labor laws are being abused in some of these foreign nations. Thought this was kind of a little bit of a different article than what we normally talk about on a podcast. Kind of want to get your guys' take on it.
Yeah, I thought the social aspects to it in terms of, I had no idea that chocolate was being manufactured that way, and that, that it was being sourced from child labor in these countries like that. That's, that does make you think, to your point about, all the things that people out there protest. Yeah, this seems like the thing to be protesting. It does not sound good or feel good. It really gave me a bad feeling after reading that and thinking about that situation. I think the technicalities of the court case are interesting in the sense of the Supreme Court drawing that line of U.S. kind of globalization and saying, well, the decisions and the actions to violate international laws on child labor were not occurring on U.S. soil. They're not happening in the U.S., and so it's not in their purview. It's not in their jurisdiction to do something about that. And unfortunately, as sickening as it feels, I that makes sense to me as well. That it's this is a bad issue, but on the technicalities of what our court should be ruling on, our courts don't have jurisdiction over what happens in foreign countries in that way. So we need to recognize that reality, that there is still, we're not a unified world when it comes to the justice system or when it comes to laws. There really are still different countries with different norms and different ways of doing things that, unfortunately, as saddening as it may be, we have to accept that about the rest of the world. So not a fun story in that regard. Interesting on the technical merits and some awareness on what's happening with our chocolate.
Yeah, I got to say, it's such a sad topic, but I'm with you. I can see how that would be difficult to say that, the U.S. should be, looking into these issues overseas in places that, like you said, doesn't have jurisdiction. I think the only thing we really can do as individuals is to be aware of, and this is easier said than done, but to be aware of what those, those companies' practices and to share that knowledge. I have seen some bad publicity for Nestle in the past online that I think was trying to bring light to some of these type of issues. But I think the more that we know that, yeah, even things as seemingly harmless as chocolate can have some pretty questionable production methods. So yeah, it's good to be aware, but wouldn't want to try to manage that issue of overseeing that in other nations.
It's just we've heard these stories before. A lot of high name, Nike comes to mind, and they'll talk about the fact that they're abusing a lot of these child labor laws and labor laws in some of these other countries. But again, I think if you want to protest something and you really put your money where your mouth is. I mean, don't buy their products. But go outside those headquarters and protest if you want to really draw attention to it, because to what we've all kind of said here, it's not up to our Supreme Court to enforce laws in foreign countries, and that's definitely a slippery slope. I don't think we want to even try to transcend that. But yeah, Charlie, do you have an article for us this week?
Yeah, I've got another article from CNBC. It's not any more uplifting than the other article, but maybe. It's called 4 Million People Quit Their Jobs in April, Sparked by Confidence That They Can Find Better Work. And so what's happened is that, basically people are leaving their jobs en masse on the belief that they can find better jobs elsewhere. And it said that some of the largest sectors that have seen these exits happening was in retail, trade, professional and business services, transportation, warehousing, and utilities, which I guess I would expect to see quite a bit of turnover in. But there were a record 9.3 million job openings in April. And so, yeah, there's a bunch of things opening up. And I guess I just wanted to kind of talk about the challenges of, employers are struggling to fill these new roles, even though they have them. The article talks about kind of the best way to do that is to raise wages. And so I guess I wanted to just get your guys' take on any advice to job seekers or to employers kind of as we enter this new, go back to normalcy here and things start to open up. Any advice to those who are either going to be in the job market or going to be on the, hiring end of it?
I mean, where my heart goes immediately is to the small business owner who struggled to keep their workforce in place, and during the pandemic, and maybe was challenged financially to keep that workforce in place, but went ahead and did it. Now, of course, there were stimulus programs, so maybe they got the benefit of a PPP program or an EIDL loan or something else for keeping their workforce in place. But you can just imagine those scenarios where a small business owner struggled to keep that workforce in place, and then the workforce turns around and is leaving as soon as things are opening up, and there's other opportunities that it just that kind of stinks, right? When that happens. But it's a reminder that it's a real thing. I think a lot of times small business owners that I talk to, they think about their team and their workforce as being something that they're idealizing will be committed to the company and committed to them in perpetuity. And we don't have slavery in this country, right? I mean, it doesn't work that way. You're not going to be guaranteed to keep people on your team indefinitely and forever. And you have to. My advice to any business is build a process and a system that can handle turnover. We also know that, I say that, and I'm sure a lot of people will push back and say, well, retention saves dollars because when you have a lot of turnover, it's very inefficient and that costs companies lots of money. Yeah, that's true. I'm not suggesting that you should not try to retain employees, but I also think that if you build your company with the fantasy that you're going to retain all your employees, that's also bad, right? So I think you have to do both. Do what you can to retain employees, but don't create a system that requires that you retain your employees in order for it to work. That would be my primary advice on the employer end. The other thing I wanted to mention on this topic, well, hey, I'll stop here. I'll let others comment. Maybe I'll come back and mention the next thing I have. So circle back to me because I have another thought about this I was thinking about.
Oh, fair enough. No, that's you've every time I see this article and it comes up, but I'm always doubtful when I hear it. Like, yeah, sure, people are doing that. But when Charlie went through the categories of where they're losing the jobs, that kind of makes sense. I mean, I could see people hunker down the last year and a half, just take any job, just keep money coming in. But now as they see things opening back up again, that's the first thing they're going to do is the hell with working with it. I'm not working retail anymore. I've got a degree in X and I'm going to go try and get a job in that. The struggle is real. I mean, not even just small company. I mean, every company. I mean, I when I go through and I talk to these business owners and I get buyers for some of these businesses and they'll come in and one of their big, they're really interested in what workforce they're going to get. And I mean, I have one small deal with that has, possibly two employees that come along with it. And, they're asking more questions about the employees than they are about the business because, it's kind of that's a big attraction. I mean, to get two trained people in place. And so, yeah, I mean, that's kind of, like I say, usually when I see these things, I don't believe that people are just quitting because, geez, I hate my job today. I can go get a better one tomorrow. But when you mention the categories, that probably kind of does make sense. It almost speaks to the fact that people have been hunkered down and they really do feel confident that things are going to open up and they can get a better job. That was kind of my take on it.
Yeah, I also think I want to throw in there just in terms of considering, why is this happening? There's a lot of reasons it's happening, I'm sure, but one thought that came to my mind, one hypothesis is simply that every business has been dealing with operating in a different kind of environment now. During the pandemic and post-pandemic, things are different than they were before we even thought we would have a pandemic, right? I mean, things are just different, and I think that for good or bad or somewhat indifferent, I think a lot of the workforce kind of looks at their job and they look at the company and they realize that it's not the same routine that they had before the pandemic. It's just not the same, right? And I think that's not necessarily a bad thing, but I think it creates this kind of great reset, right? It's like, okay, well, working in this job is never going to be the same as it was before because of all these changes that have been made to deal with the pandemic scenario. So in these circumstances that are now different, I'm now living in a different world. Do I even want this job? I think that's a rational question for anyone to ask is, the circumstances have changed. The things that you liked about the job before the pandemic may not even exist now in that role or in that job after the pandemic. And so, yeah, I think that, that's the thing about life. Things are always changing, and the pandemic created an enormous amount of change. And then it created a sense of fear that people didn't want to. They hunkered down. They didn't want to make a move or anything from the work that they were doing. So they just stayed where they were, even though everything was changing around them. And then, so as things become positive now, as the economy's opening up, I think it's natural for everyone to look around and be like, okay, we now live in a different environment, it's a different world than it was pre-pandemic. It's over a year and a half later. What do I want to do? What do I want in my life now? So I think, yeah, I would just throw that out there as a possible explanation of what we see going on here.
No, I think that makes total sense. And just to kind of elaborate on that, I mean, another point the article brought up was about unemployment benefits being a factor in the whole thing as well, since there had been some expansion of those programs had led to people then not wanting to jump back into work or to quit to go on to those. So yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. What do you think, Jack? Do you have another article we can talk about?
It's funny. It's kind of a good thing that we did that article leading into this other one, because I kind of think the two on some level are interrelated. There's just shortages of everything right now, and labor is definitely one of them. Now, this article tries to make the case for this maybe this inflation really is transitory, because they talk about how lumber has fallen 22% off of its peak. I just think that's kind of the calm before the storm, because I've had nothing but discussions, a lot of them just this very day, about these supply chain disruptions and just how bad it is and just how bad the shortage of things are. And the fact that we've got these labor shortages out there, there's nobody to produce these things. There's nobody to ship these things. The story I heard today was from an automotive technician who customer came in. I want to say it was a Honda, and I think there was a wheel bearing that was bad on it. And, under normal circumstances, they just call a parts store and they get the part and they put it on, and none of the parts stores had it. And then they called the dealer, and the dealer told them there's 9 of these parts in the entire country right now. There's shortages of everything. So, it might not just be a matter of taking your car up there and, geez, I need a muffler. Well, they might not be able to get your muffler that day or that week. So these shortages are just, they're real. And from what, again, I've talked to several contractors, and back in the day, you'd go into Home Depot and there was just a whole, shelves and shelves of electrical switches and boxes and things of that nature. And you go in there now and those shelves are empty. And if you don't get to that trough at 7 o'clock in the morning early with the other contractors, if you get there at 8 o'clock, there's nothing on the shelf. So, based on everything I'm seeing, I think these supply chain disruptions, these shortages, I think they're real. Everything runs up and does a pullback, but unfortunately, I think it's just going to charge again and probably get that 22% back and then some. Everything I'm hearing and seeing is that we have real shortages everywhere, and that's going to lead to supply chain disruptions and shortages. And I think inflation is going to get even worse. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I guess, with this article with saying that the lumber prices have decreased 22% from their high, I guess what I'm hearing is it's time for me to go out to the big box store and stock up on the lumber, right? As much as I can. But, then I guess I would presume I'm not the only one thinking that. So, yeah, I suspect that price decrease will evaporate pretty quickly as people go out and kind of grab as much as they need with the lower prices. Because, I know a lot of people were putting all, the use of lumber type projects for the summertime, we're putting that all on hold because of those prices. So I hesitate to believe that those lumber prices are going to stay low. They're just going to drop like that, and now we're good, and they've normalized back at a lower value. That seems too good to be true in that vein. Yeah, and I think when I saw the title of the article, transitory inflation, I was struggling to understand what it meant, like in the sense of, are we saying that inflation was here, but now it's stopped and then it's going to come back again and then it stops again? Or they're just hoping, they're hoping that inflation was only a temporary thing and now we're done with it? I don't think so. I think once momentum on something like that starts, it doesn't stop that easily.
Well, and I think particularly with something so practical and tangible as wood or lumber, it's like when you see those peaks and then you realize that you're just going to need wood, it's like go out there and get it and not try to play the market, so to speak, because that that's going to have use to you later down the road. And so I think that maybe is unique in that versus other products that might not have as practical applications. But yeah, I agree. I think the price changes are here to stay. I've seen them in all sorts of other areas too. I know that in computer parts, RAM has like doubled in price, and video cards have been like massive, and out of stock for a long time. And so I think we're going to keep seeing those things. And it's going to mean that as consumers, we're going to have to start making tough choices about how do we value individual products? What can we make sense to, still need to buy, or maybe there's something we can do to react to these supply chain shortages by changing how we consume. So, it'll be interesting to see, but I think on some of them, lumber, nobody's going to be getting away from that as a whole. And so many other computer parts or other things are just going to be, suffer these supply chain shortages.
It's funny, Ty, watch Bloomberg Business News in the morning. All they talk about is they've been talking about it for months, the infamous transitory inflation that the Fed's always talking about. I don't think this phantom inflation that's going to be here today and gone tomorrow, but it's gotten outrageous. I mean, I was even talking to contractors they'll get to the point where they'll be tearing something apart and they're actually reusing some lumber, not for two reasons. One, there's such a supply shortage. And then, something that used to be, $2 is, I like 2x4s are an outrageous price right now. So, tear something apart. And if it's still in decent shape, they'll reuse it, reconstructing things, to save on cost and the fact that things are short. So, I think it's just getting warmed up. Charlie, you have another article for us this week?
Yeah, I think I've got one that ties in pretty good to what we're talking about here. In CNBC, there was an article called "China is kicking out more than half the world's Bitcoin miners, and a whole lot of them could be heading to Texas." And so what's happening is that, basically, I guess the article really summed it up. But a lot of people are, China has began this movement to stop Bitcoin mining due to its environmental cost and probably due to a variety of other reasons as well. And as they've cracked down on that activity, the people who were doing it have to find new places to go. And it turns out that Texas is a pretty good place for a variety of reasons, a lot of them having to do with power. It's a very good place for solar and wind power. And it has proximity to a lot of other infrastructure type resources that are needed in that activity. As you know, or may not know, Bitcoin mining is very transactional and computational and whatnot. And so it requires a lot of computer parts that are, constantly in demand. And so, I just thought it was interesting because I didn't foresee a mass exodus of Chinese Bitcoin miners to Texas. But when the article lays out some of the points about why they might want to go there, it seemed reasonable. And so the only thing I was really thinking about is Texas has heat waves and has some challenges that have nothing to do with this. And so I'm kind of wondering, will their infrastructure be able to handle the stress of all this influx of Bitcoin mining, or are we about to see rolling outages hit Texas as soon as the heat turns up? What do you guys think?
Well, when I first saw this, I have to admit I was envisioning like this just horde of people from China that are literal Bitcoin miners immigrating to Texas. And I was thinking, well, how does that work with our immigration policy and all the immigration problems we've been having lately? Really, we're just going to have all these Bitcoin miners from China are going to just show up in Texas? How are they going to get the visas and the immigration status? How's that possibly going to work? Then I read deeper in the article and realized, they mean like Chinese, and they're talking about projects that are like $20-40 million like investment projects, so that they mean like Chinese investors and businesses would be moving to Texas, not just hordes of people from China moving to Texas. So that was my view of it. I mean, it's still there probably is some immigration policy wrapped into that whole thing if there really is this mass exodus of people. One of the ways that immigration works is like there's this like concept of people who have special skills get farther in front of the line kind of thing. And so I'm like, well, is Bitcoin mining considered a special skill? Is perhaps so, but I think worldwide money gets you in the door more than anything. So I'm sure if they're plopping $20-40 million down, that helps solve that particular part of the problem. But then it's like, well, Texas may have the cheapest energy, but if it becomes kind of this place for crypto farms, then that it's supply. It's like what we were talking about a minute ago with inflation and supply and demand of commodity, right? I mean, if you've got your crypto farms using up a bunch of the power grid in Texas, then you can only imagine that's going to up the cost of power for the average person in Texas. So that probably is not a great result either. And then of course, like you said, Charlie, well, what happens if it crashes the grid for some reason or takes up those valuable resources when the grid otherwise crashes for other reasons? That certainly would be problematic. So, yeah.
Well, it's like Bitcoin's a new thing to steal headlines away from the Kardashians and Elon Musk. All you got to do is throw Bitcoin in a headline and people are all about it. But it's almost funny that, you know, this maverick mentality would end up in Texas, that they'd welcome them on board. But, you know, as we know, we were talking about, you know, them not being able to keep, you know, heat on in homes and living like the Flintstones 3 months ago. So, you know, I'm wondering if they have thought this all the way through, or if they're going to get out ahead of it with this infrastructure, because it's always these unintended consequences. These they all sound like great ideas, but have they thought this all the way through? But yeah, I don't know. Everything Bitcoin seems to make my head explode a little bit. But it's always fun to talk about.
Yeah, I will say it is difficult to find an article in the news that doesn't in some way involve Bitcoin. So it's been a theme.
Thank you for joining us for another edition of the None of Our Businesses YouTube show and podcast. Today's business issues and other issues is seen through the eyes of accountants. I have to remind you, don't forget to check out our other show, Profitless on Purpose. Give us some likes, give us some shares, tell your friends, your peers about us, and come back and see us again next week. Have a great week, everybody. So long.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.